Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Goodness. The world is buzzing with lots of events. Some are pleasant and others are not. In the unpleasant category, one can't overlook this. Israel. Why are they so prominent and plays a significant role in the world politics? A small country in the Middle East, bordered to the north by Lebanon, to the northeast by Syria, to the east and the southwest by Jordan, and to the southwest by Egypt, and to the west is the Mediterranean Sea. The area was part of the Roman Empire, later the Byzantine Empire, before falling under the control of the Islamic Caliphate in the 7th century, the Christian era. People who lived here, generally known as Palestinian people, remain under the sway of successive Islamic dynasties until the collapse of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I, when it was placed under the British mandate from the League of Nations. So what is League of Nations, you might ask? The first worldwide intergovernmental organization whose principal mission was to maintain world peace. Even before the mandate, the desire for a Jewish homeland promoted a small number of Jewish to immigrate to Palestine. A migration that grew dramatically during the second quarter of the 20th century with the increased persecution of Jews worldwide and the subsequent Holocaust perpetrated by Nazi Germany. The first modern-day Jewish settlers established themselves on the coastal plain in the 1880s. From the coastal, they moved inland to other areas like the Judean foothills and the Jordan, evacuated by Palestinians during the Arab-Israel War of 1948, thereby becoming the majority in many areas previously inhabited by Arabs. In among the many wars fought in this region, Arab-Israeli War in 1948 is one to note for curiosity. The civil war became a war of separate states with the Israeli Declaration of Independence 1948, the end of the British mandate for Palestine, and the entry of the military coalition of Arab states into the territory of mandatory Palestine. As a result of the war, the state of Israel controlled the area that a UN had proposed for the Jewish state, as well as almost 60% of the area proposed for Arab state. Israel also took control of West Jerusalem, which was meant to be part of an international zone for Jerusalem and its environs. Over 700,000 Palestinians, Arabs, fled or were expelled from their homes in the area that became Israel, marking the beginning of the Palestinian refugee problem in what they referred to as the Nakba, the catastrophe. A similar number of Jewish moved to Israel during the 3 years following the war, including 260,000 from the surrounding Arab states. Jerusalem is the proclaimed capital, although the latter status has not received wider international recognition. Before 1948, Jewish and Arab agricultural settlements existed side by side, but were largely independent of each other. Since then, thousands of Arabs from the Gaza Strip and the Israel-occupied territory of the West Bank have found employment in Israel, in the citrus groves or in the industry as a construction laborers. The ready labor pool, together with increased agricultural mechanization, has led to the drop in the number of Jewish agricultural workers. Israel fought a series of wars against neighboring Arab states during the next 35 years, which have resulted in ongoing disputes over the territory and the status of refugees despite continuing tensions. However, Israel concluded peace treaties with several neighboring Arab states during the final quarter of the 20th century. So what's involvement Israel has in Lebanon? The Israel-Lebanese conflict is a long-running conflict involving Israel-Lebanon-based paramilitary groups and sometimes Syria. The conflict peaked during the Lebanese Civil War. In response to Palestinian attacks from Lebanon, Israel invaded the country in 1978 and again in 1982. After this, it occupied the southern Lebanon until 2000. So, now it's a time to look at the rise of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is an influential Lebanese Shia Muslim political party and an armed group. Hezbollah rose to prominence in the 1980s in opposition to Israel, whose forces has occupied southern Lebanon during the country's 1970-1990 civil war. It consisted of militia fighters from southern Lebanon's predominantly the Shia Muslim population, who drew inspiration from the religious popularism of the Iranian Revolution just a few years earlier in 1979. When the civil war ended, Hezbollah continues to press the Israel Defense Force, which remained in southern Lebanon as an occupying force and positioned itself as a champion of Lebanese causes against Israeli aggression. After the withdrawal of Israeli forces in 2000, land disputes and Israel's detention of Lebanese nationals were among the issues that led to the cross-border skirmishes between Hezbollah and the IDF. In 2004, Israel released hundreds of mostly Palestinian and Lebanese prisoners in exchange for an Israel businessman and the remains of 3 Israeli soldiers who had been captured by Hezbollah in October 2000. Hezbollah has a significant presence in both the Lebanese parliament and government, and it controls the most powerful armed force in the country. Hezbollah has participated in Lebanon's national elections since 1992 and has become a major political power. It has received strong backing from Iran, both financially and militarily, for many years. It is also a strong ally of the Syrian president. It is one of the most heavily armed non-state military forces in the world. The group is designated as a terrorist organization by the Western states, Israel and Gulf Arab states. The organization has claimed that at one stage that it has 100,000 fighters. The group and its allies lost their majority in parliament in 2022 election. But a new government has not been formed since then, and it continues to have ministers in a caretaker administration. Lebanon is deeply divided over Hezbollah. While the group enjoys substantial popular support, many opponents accuse it of involvement in political corruption and oppose its military capabilities, viewing them as a significant factor in the country's conflict. As a powerful political entity, Hezbollah also operates schools, hospitals, cultural institutions, and charities across Lebanon. Hezbollah and have fought in Syrian civil war as well. It has much more sophisticated weapons at its disposal than Hamas does in Gaza, as some say. So in 2006, Hezbollah launched a barrage of rockets into northern Israel, diverting the IDF's attention as Hezbollah militants infiltrated the border. 8 Israeli soldiers were killed and 2 others were kidnapped during the campaign. Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah's leader, had hoped the abduction would open negotiation for another prisoner exchange, but he had underestimated the situation. Israel launched a massive air operation, bombing Hezbollah headquarters and rocket stockpilers in Beirut and militia positions and rocket launches in south as well as strategic targets such as Beirut airport, roads and bridges to prevent the abducted soldiers being spirited out of the country and fresh military supplies from reaching Hezbollah. Hostilities came to an end after Israel, Hezbollah and the Lebanese government accepted the conditions of the United Nations resolution. So what was in the resolution? It called for an immediate ceasefire, the dependence of Lebanese troops and US peacekeepers to southern Lebanon, the withdrawal of the IDF and Hezbollah from the same area, and the disarmament of Hezbollah. Hezbollah's ability to fight the IDF to a standstill no other Arab militia had accomplished, and emerges as heroes throughout much of the Arab world. State of affairs now. Hezbollah started firing rockets on Israel in support of Gaza in October 2023, a day after Hamas militants launched an unprecedented attack on Israel. Since then, the two sides have been engaged in escalating cross-border strikes. Israel have vowed to step up pressure on Hezbollah until it holds its attacks that have displaced tens of thousands of Israelis from communities near the Lebanese border. The recent fighting has also displaced more than 200,000 Lebanese in the past week, according to the United Nations. Now, how the technology and electronics being used as a weapon of war. Deadly attack in which thousands of handheld pages were blown up in homes, shops, markets and streets across Lebanon. Israel, a local news report said, was targeting the devices of the militant Hezbollah group. Within minutes, hospitals were flooded with bodied patients. A day later, a similar attack struck walkie-talkies. In total, the explosion killed at least 37 people and injured more than 3,000. Many of them are civilians. Israel is widely believed to be behind the blast, although it has neither confirmed nor denied responsibility. The full-blown war with Israel could be devastating for Lebanon. The country's crisis-battered healthcare system that has been preparing for the possibility of conflict with Israel, even before hospitals became inundated with the wounded from the latest explosions. Most of the injuries received were in the face, in the eyes and limbs, many of them in the critical condition and requiring extended hospital stay. I saw horrific things that day, said one, who was running an errand in Beirut's southern suburb, where Hezbollah has a strong presence, when the pages began blowing up. Suddenly, we started seeing scooters whizzing by carrying defaced men, some without fingers, some with their guts spilling out. Then the ambulance started coming. The shock, the disarray, the trauma is reminiscent of Beirut after the port explosion in 2020. Only this time it was not limited to a city but spread across the country, mentioned a social media post. In the aftermath of exploding pages, fear and paranoia has taken hold. Parents kept their children away from schools and universities, fearing more exploding devices. Organizations, including the Lebanese Civil Defense, advised personnel to switch off their devices and remove all batteries until further notice. One woman said she disconnected her baby monitor and other household appliances. Lebanon's civil aviation authorities have banned the transportation of pagers and walkie-talkies on their airplanes departing from Beirut's Rafik Hariri International Airport until further notice. Some residents were sleeping with their phones in another room. Considered as a major security breach for a secretive organization like Hezbollah. A resident of Lebanon said, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been threatening Lebanon with war for a past year, and he should just do it. If we are going to die, we will die. We are already dying. We are already dead, he said. Another blow to Hezbollah. The leader Hasa Nasrallah was killed in a massive bombardment carried out by Israel on the group's central headquarters in the southern suburbs of Beirut. Most of the senior leaders of Hezbollah, and so much for Hamas as well, have been or are being eliminated as I speak to you today. Nasrallah is a larger-than-life personality, led the Iran-backed group for more than 32 years, serving as a political and a spiritual leader who guided Hezbollah to a place of prominence in Lebanon. To his enemies, he was a head of a terrorist organization and a proxy for Iran, and in its tussle for influence in the Middle East. No doubt this will be a major setback for the organization, some say. So what are the sentiments around the latest events? While many in Israel celebrated the killing of Nasrallah, Israel's military said it still had a way to go in the fight against Hezbollah and would continue targeting its leaders. The army's chief of staff said, "The message is simple. Anyone who threatens the citizens of Israel, we will know how to reach them." So, statement from Hezbollah. Nasrallah, who led the group for more than 3 decades, has joined his fellow martyrs. The group vowed to continue the holy war against the enemy and in support of Palestine. Now, the mention of Iran's supreme leader remained deficient amid Nasrallah's fate, saying Israel had not seriously heard Hezbollah's strong structure and urging Muslims around the world to stand with Hezbollah in confronting Israel. Let the Zionist criminals know that they are far too insignificant to cause any major damage to the strong structure of Hezbollah in Lebanon, said in reference to Israel. By the grace of God, Lebanon will make the invading, wicked, and indiscreet enemy regard their actions, he said. Wait a second. The US has to say something here. And here we go. The US President Joe Biden welcomed Hasa Nasrallah's killing. And after the Israel's incursion began, the US Defense Secretary released a statement saying that he agreed with the Israel on the necessity of dismantling Hezbollah attack infrastructure along the border. However, Mr. Austin also reiterated that diplomatic resolution is required to ensure the safety of civilians on both sides of the border. You might wonder where the rest of the Arab world is. You might wonder what the rest of the Arab world is up to. The coincidental timing of an emergency meeting of Gulf foreign ministers in Doha, with a visit to the same city by the Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian for talks with Qatar amid raises questions about how the Gulf states will react. If Israel pushes ahead with its plan to use its recent military success not just to weaken Iran but reorder the Middle East, the Sunni coalition of 6 Gulf monarchs is not naturally well disposed to Iran or its Shia proxies. And only in 2016, the group labeled Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. But they also oppose further Israeli escalation and believe it is ultimately only Only Washington that has the means to restrain the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Palestinian statehood is a prerequisite for peace, rather than its byproduct, the Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan mentioned recently. You wonder the power that Washington has on the rest of the world is scary, to mean that the world is waiting for them to resolve matters. It goes back to a saying, who's going to tie the dog down? Now, let's see what the Prime Minister of Israel has to say on the recent events. There is no place in Iran or in the Middle East that Israel's long arm cannot reach. And today you know how much that is true, he said. So, after all this political stunt, all these fights, now we ask a question. Who is Benjamin Netanyahu? So 3 times Prime Minister, whereby the longest serving Prime Minister in Israel's history. He has born to a secular Jewish parents. Netanyahu was raised in West Jerusalem and United States. Returned to Israel in 1967 and joined the Israel Defense Force later and honorably discharged. Returned to US, graduated from the Institute of Technology. Netanyahu worked for the Boston Consulting Group. Yes, he had a private career. Again, he returns to Israel in 1978 and founded the Jonathan Netanyahu Anti-Terror Institute. So what led to the establishment of this institute, and who is Jonathan Netanyahu? Jonathan Netanyahu is the brother of Benjamin Netanyahu. He was an Israeli military officer who commanded the raid in 1976, hijacking of an international civilian passenger flight from Israel to France by Palestine and German militants. Though Israel's counter-terrorist operation was a success, with large number of hostages were rescued, Jonathan was killed in action, the only Israeli soldier killed during the crisis. So, in 1979, Jonathan Institute was founded by Benjamin Netanyahu in order to sponsor international conferences on terrorism. So this makes one wonder whether there are any personal grudges underpinning the continuing war between Israel and Palestine. Well, let's continue to look at the Benjamin's profile. Once he was an Israeli's ambassador to the United Nations, Netanyahu served in ministerial capacity in various portfolios before he was elected as Likud member in 1988. In 1993, Netanyahu became the chair of the right-wing Israeli political party, Likud, thereby a leader of the opposition. So what is Likud, the political party, and what's their background? Founded in 1973 to challenge the Israeli Labour Party, which governed the country since independence in 1948, which then captured the power in 1977. Likud alternated in government with a left-wing coalition, forming coalitions with minor parties, especially those with an ultra-religious or a nationalist ideology. Because of the country's political fragmentation and unique security need, Likud and its competitors have sometimes entered into unity government with another. Ideologically, Likud is both conservative and nationalist. It took a vague stance towards the 1993 peace accord between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO. Although Likud supported a peace with guarantees of security, it opposed ceding major portions of the land to Palestine control and dismantling Israeli settlements in the territories that Israel had conquered in 1967. However, in subsequent years, the party grew increasingly divided over its policies concerning a two-state solution. In the early 21st century, it adopted a policy opposing the establishment of Palestine state under any conditions. Consequently, those in the party who supported the implementation of the two-state solution splintered off into Kadima, the Forward Party. During 1977 and 83, Israel signed a peace treaty with Egypt, for which Begin was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize with Egyptian Press Anwar Sadat and launched the controversial invasion of Lebanon. And can you see how the political parties and their ideologies and various stands in their coalition governments actually changed? Netanyahu became noted for his opposition to the 1993 Israel-PLO peace accords and the resulting Israeli withdrawals from the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The governing Labour Party entered the 1996 election with weakened electoral appeal. Following the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin in November the previous year by a Jewish extremist and a series of suicide bombing by Muslim militants early in 1996, where Netanyahu eked out a victory, became the youngest person ever to serve as Israel's prime minister. Unrest dominated Netanyahu's first prime ministership. Soon after he entered office, relations with Syria deteriorated, and his decision to open an ancient tunnel near Al-Aqsa Mosque angered Palestinians and sparked intense fighting. Netanyahu then reversed his earlier opposition to the 1993 peace accords and in 1997 agreed to withdraw troops from most of the West Bank town of Hebron. Pressure from within its coalition led Netanyahu to announce his intention to establish a new Jewish settlement on land claimed by Palestinians. He also significantly lowered the amount of the land that would be handed over to the Palestinians during Israel's next phase of withdrawal from the West Bank. Violent protests, including a series of bombing, followed. In 1998, Netanyahu and the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat participated in peace talks that resulted in a memorandum, the terms of which included placing as much as 40% of the West Bank under Palestinian control. The agreement was opposed by the right-wing groups in Israel and several fractions in Netanyahu's government coalition quit. Let go government dissolving and new elections were held in 1999. This clearly shows that his stance on Palestine kept changing as when the pressure was mounting within his own territory. The election campaign started again. Netanyahu's re-election campaign was hindered by a fragmented right wing as well as by voters' growing dislikes of his inconsistent peace policies. His often abrasive style, a series of scandals have plagued his administration due to a series of appointments he has done, and so on and so on, led to the defeat of Netanyahu by then leader of the Labour Party, Ehud Barak. In the period between 1999 and 2009, served as the foreign minister and the finance minister, regained party leadership but was party's unsuccessful prime ministerial candidate for the 2006. Again, the elections in 2009, because of the close and inconclusive nature of the result. However, it was not immediately clear which party's leader would be invited to form a coalition government, though the course of coalition discussions in the days that followed, Netanyahu gathered the support from various parties and formed the government. In the second term, Netanyahu was the first time expressed qualified support for the principle of an independent Palestinian state, with the condition that any future Palestinian state would have to be demilitarized and would have to formally recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Those conditions were quickly rejected by Palestinian leaders. A brief round of negotiations in 2010 broke down when a 10-month partial memorandum on building settlements in the West Bank expired, and Israel refused to extend it. The peace process remained at a standstill for the rest of Netanyahu's term. So now what is changing in Netanyahu's relationship with Iran? Netanyahu also took a hard line in line with foreign affairs, lobbying for the international community to take strong actions against Iran's alleged nuclear weapons program, which he described as the greatest threat to Israeli security and world peace. Netanyahu and his relationship with Arab countries. He also expressed pessimistic views regarding the series of popular uprisings and revolutions in the Arab world in 2011 that were collectively referred to as Arab Spring, predicting that new Arab leaders would be more hostile to Israel rather than the predecessors. It's not all that smooth run for him, is it? Domestically, Netanyahu faced growing economic discontent among the middle class and the young. Large street protests spread throughout Israel, decrying social and economic inequality and calling on the government to increase its support for transportation, education, childcare, housing, and other public services. Following that, his coalition was threatened twice by disagreement with coalition partners over military draft exemption for Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox Jewish. Finally, a coalition crisis in 2012 led to early elections after the coalition met in gridlock over an austerity budget. Election in 2013 returned Netanyahu to the post of prime minister, but at the head of the coalition that appeared closer to the political center than his previous one. A regenerated center-left has emerged and had campaigned on the middle-class socio-economic concerns of the 2011 protest. In July 2014, Netanyahu ordered a large-scale military operation in the Gaza Strip in response to rocket fire into Israel. At the end of 50-day campaign, Netanyahu stated that the objective of significantly damaging militants' capability to fire rockets had been achieved. Internationally, however, the operation was criticized for the high number of Palestinian casualties. Again, the internal issues raised. By 2014, serious disagreements has emerged within the governing coalition over budget issues and the controversial bill that would have defined Israel as due to a couple of dismissal from the cabinet, which triggered early elections set for 2015. Now, tension with US. Tensions was injected into the relationship with Netanyahu and the US President Barack Obama, already strained by disagreements over negotiations with the Palestinians. In 2014, when Netanyahu emerged as a vocal critic of the Obama administration's Iran policy, which sought to resolve the Iranian nuclear issue through international negotiation. Netanyahu charged that any compromise will ultimately leave Iran with the option of developing nuclear weapons, and that sanctions against Iran should be maintained instead. Election 2015. How many elections has he been through, or the country has been through? Now this is 2015. Once again, Netanyahu and Likud won. So is Netanyahu's hands clean? And Netanyahu's fourth term took place in the shadow of 4 ongoing investigations into bribery and other forms of corruption, allegedly committed by Netanyahu and members of his inner circle. In 2018, Israeli police announced that they found sufficient evidence to recommend charges of bribery and fraud in 2 of the cases. In the first case, Netanyahu had allegedly traded political favors for gifts including expensive cigars, champagnes, and jewelry. Second case, Netanyahu had allegedly sought to secure favorable coverage from the Israeli newspaper Jedodic Aronoth in exchange for cutting the circulation of rival paper Israel Hayom. The police recommended charges against several people close to Netanyahu for a third case, involving bribery to procure Israelis' purchase of submarine from a particular group, but Netanyahu himself was not implicated. Charges against Netanyahu were recommended in the fourth case, alleging that he had advanced favorable regulatory policies for Bezeq, a telecommunication company, in exchange for positive media coverage in its controlling shareholders' news outlet. Another political instability. Netanyahu's political associate largely stuck by him as he denied the allegations and refused to step down. But he soon lost support from his coalition partners amid a series of policy disagreements. A ceasefire with Hamas at the recommendation of the country's defense establishment after the most intense fighting between Israel and the groups in years prompted the resignation of the defense minister and the withdrawal of his party from the 61 out of 120 seats in the cabinet. The deadline loomed to renew controversial Haredi ultra-Orthodox conscription exemption and prompted disagreement among Netanyahu's remaining coalition partners. The cabinet, the assembly was resolved, and early elections were called in 2019. Elections in 2019 and 2020. For the first time in Israel history, 3 sets of elections were held before a new government could be formed. Also, this appeared to be due to waning political support for Netanyahu's policy rather than any controversy surrounding his corruption charges. Less than 6 weeks before the elections, Israeli Attorney General announced that he would pursue the recommended charges against Netanyahu for bribery, fraud, and a breach of trust, subject to a hearing. His party performed well in the election despite the charges, and it appeared that he had won another term as Prime Minister. But coalition negotiation remains at a standoff because his potential coalition partners could not come to an agreement with Haredi conscription. New elections were held in September with similar results, and again no coalition could be formed. In 2020, just before the scheduled start of his trial, the results saw significant gains by Likud. But Netanyahu still fell short of enough support to form a coalition. With the backing of the Joint List, a party representing the interests of Palestinian citizens of Israel, a retired army general received the mandate to form a government. As the COVID-19 pandemic took hold of the country, however, Gantz agreed to form an emergency unity government under Netanyahu's premiership, signing a power-sharing deal that would hand the office over to Gantz after 18 months. But the emergency unity government, plagued by infighting and criticized for its handling of the COVID-19 crisis, was short-lived. Amid his controversial management of the lockdowns and the economy and his corruption trial finally underway, Netanyahu's popularity plummeted, even as the United States secured agreements from several Arab countries to normalize ties with Israel. At the end of 2020, the emergency unity government remained unstable to pass an annual budget for 2021, leading to the dissolution of the cabinet. Election in 2021. Count it if you can. A new round of elections were held in March 2021, and despite a highly successful COVID-19 vaccination drive in early 2021, Netanyahu and his allies again fell short of the majority of cabinet seats. Lapid and the Lapid announced the formation of the broader coalition with Naftali Bennett as a prime minister, inaugurating the end of Netanyahu's second stint as a prime minister. Election 2022. Netanyahu's corruption trial was derailed in early 2022 when it was reported that the police had used Pegasus spyware to hack the cell phones of some of the trial's witnesses. The revelation caused delays in testimony and damaged the trial's integrity in the eyes of the public. In May, Netanyahu's defense team demonstrated that the key meeting alleged by the prosecution could not have taken place on the date claimed, an indictment casting further doubt on the strength of their case in the bizarre allegation. Netanyahu returned to power. The results saw the right-wing national camp of former Prime Minister win the parliament majority. Now, here I want you to think deep. The war between Israel and Hezbollah. Is it a power battle between ideologies? Or is it an outright religious battle? Or simply a battle between the West and the segment of the Middle East? Or is this a Netanyahu battle to destroy the enemy and claim to stand tall as a martyr to stabilize his political state in Israel? Or is this the battle to control Middle East, to access resources and easy routes to transport? Or are there any shadow figures who are becoming rich as the darkness of the war kept alive? You and I deep down know no battle has brought permanent resolution to conflict in the human history. And we know freedom cannot be obtained standing among the dead bodies. But if that was the case, who are we seeking freedom for? With that, I will leave you today. Until then, you look after yourself. I will meet you in another episode of Goodness. Thank you.